Today's lesson will continue with Key Issue 4, focusing on sustainability. When looking at ecology, we're looking at the study of ecosystems. So what that means is we're looking at how the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, and the biosphere all interact with one another. When we take it a step further and focus more so on the cultural component of that, we're studying all these interactions, but how humans specifically interact with their environments. Through these interactions within the ecosystem, when geographers travel the globe and go to many different places, they recognize that culture can be reflected in these interactions. Below cultural ecology are two distinctions. The first one is environmental determinism. This is where the environment causes human culture. It dictates it. What that means is because of conditions in the environment, the culture is going to be dictated by that. And as it evolves over time, we can still date that influence to environmental factors. Possibilism, on the other hand, is when the environment sets some limits, but people can adapt in many ways. What this means is that even though there might be some limitations because the environment or the climate maybe is such that humans have been able to, through their own innovations, adapt to those limitations and maybe even create more opportunities that otherwise would not necessarily be there. Some examples for environmental determinism would be in the clothing that many individuals wear in different parts of the world depending on climate conditions. In places where it's very hot, individuals may wear very light clothing, sandals. In places where it's very cold, it would be common for someone to often bring around a raincoat or wear scarves. On the other hand, when we look at possibilism, we know that humans have created air conditioning and heating, and that's a way to get around some of the climate factors that may otherwise dictate their lives. Let's take a look at figure 1-50 located on page 36 of your textbook. The biosphere and its ecosystems exist mostly at the interface of the three abiotic systems. Geographers are mostly interested in the ecosystem of a city because approximately half of Earth's humans live in urban areas. The lithosphere, Earth's crust and upper mantle, provides the ground and the materials to erect homes and businesses. The hydrosphere provides the water for human dwellers to consume. The atmosphere is where urban dwellers emit pollutants, and some plants and other animals of the biosphere thrive with humans in the cities, where others may struggle. To explain relationships between human activities and the physical environment, many modern geographers reject environmental determinism in favor of possibilism. According to possibilism, the physical environment may limit some human actions, but people have been able to adapt and adjust to their environments. Take a look at figure 1-51 on page 37. Possibilism argues there are multiple ways for culture to interact with any particular environment. If you look at image A, some humans may prefer to mow their lawn, and if you look at image B, others might prefer to let wildflowers grow. We're going to be looking at some comparisons in sustainability methods, contrasting the Netherlands and California. The Dutch people in the Netherlands have been more inclined to modify their environment to address sustainability. California faces unsustainable demands for water. This has a lot to do with their agricultural industry. We're also going to be looking at the Florida Everglades, where human modification of low-lying lands became less sustainable with unintended environmental consequences. Take a look at these two images reflecting figures 1-52 and 1-53, located on page 38 of your textbook. Beginning in the 13th century, the Netherlands built extensive dikes to develop farmland called polders. Developing dikes to drain water made it possible for more land to be used, particularly for agriculture. These projects were implemented by the Dutch government, mainly to ensure that the country would only be dependent on its own agriculture and would not seek to import products from other countries. Even though polders were used primarily for agriculture, they were also used for housing and one of Europe's busiest airports. If you look at the key in the first image, you'll notice how land has been reclaimed over time. In 1990, however, the Dutch abandoned this project, instead instituting a reclamation project. In 1990, the Dutch called for a plan to return 263,000 hectares of farms to wetlands or forests. The Dutch had realized that widespread use of insecticides and fertilizers on Dutch farms contributed to contaminated drinking water, acid rain, and other environmental problems. Global warming could threaten the Netherlands by raising the level of the sea around the country between 20 and 58 centimeters. That's 8 to 23 inches within the next 100 years. Instead of building new dikes and polders, the Dutch have become world leaders in reducing the causes of global warming by acting to reduce industrial pollution and increasing solar and wind power use, among other actions. They're certainly being more aggressive on their actions than other countries around the world. Where the Netherlands was an example of a sustainable ecosystem, or the attempt at creating a sustainable ecosystem, California would be an example of an unsustainable ecosystem. California and some of its neighboring states have grown rapidly and prospered despite limited supplies of water. California gets around 70% of its water from surface water sources, like melting snow from mountains. The other 30% of California's water comes from groundwater sources, which happen to be underground. In the past few years, the level of precipitation has been extremely low, so less water has been available for surface sources. As a result, during our most recent drought, 60% of California's water demand came from groundwater consumption. And in turn, groundwater is being removed more rapidly than is being replenished. California experienced one of its hardest hit droughts between 2011 and 2015. Most of you were born at this time. Maybe you remember your families conserving water and being conscious of their water use. You may have also noticed the government stepping in and setting regulations on water use as well. Quickly think of the many different ways you either have conserved water or continue to conserve water today. What kinds of things do you do? Maybe you turn off the faucet when you're brushing your teeth. Or maybe your family decides they're not going to water their lawn as much or wash their cars as frequently. California's residents and businesses have been required to reduce their water usage. However, residents and businesses only use 20% of California's water. The other 80% goes to agriculture. Take a look at figures 1-54 and 1-55 located on page 39 of your textbook. Take a look at the first image. The colors are associated with the counties that have the highest per capita water use. The lowest per capita water use is in the major cities along the Pacific coast. The highest demand is in the agricultural counties of the Central Valley. If any of you had ever driven on the 5 on your way to Southern California during the height of this drought, you would have noticed many political signs on the side of the road. These signs were put up by the agricultural industry, encouraging for citizens to vote in a way that ensured that water would continue to go to farms to grow agricultural produce. So although the water usage in California, with 80% going to agriculture, is highly unsustainable, the political power that the agricultural industry has in California makes it very difficult to implement any kinds of laws or regulations that adhere to that sustainability. Next, we're going to talk about the Florida Everglades. This was once a very wide and shallow freshwater river. A sensitive ecosystem of plants and animals once thrived in this distinctive landscape, and a portion became a national park, but much of it has been destroyed by human actions. Beginning in the 1930s and continuing on through the 1960s, dikes and levees were constructed to create thousands of hectares of land for growing sugarcane and other agricultural purposes. These modifications were originally meant to protect farmland and the growing South Florida population from flooding. But the modification had unintended consequences for South Florida's ecosystem. Polluted water, mainly from cattle grazing along the banks of the canals, flowed into the lakes, which is the source of fresh water for half of Florida's population. Fish in the lake began to die from high levels of mercury, phosphorus, and other contaminants. The polluted water then continued to flow to the south into the national park, threatening native vegetation like sawgrass and endangering rare birds and other animals. Recent plans are attempting to restore a healthy ecosystem to inland South Florida. We are at the end of the lesson on Key Issue 4. Remember, the focus of Key Issue 4 is sustainability, especially with regard to the 3 pillars of sustainability. Think of the social pillar, the environmental pillar, and the economic pillar. The conflicting goals within each of these pillars may make it very difficult to establish the primary goal, which is sustainability. The primary challenge for societies is making decisions that compromise and sacrifice in a way that is still bearable, equitable, and viable to reach sustainability. Please return to Microsoft Teams for an in-class review on sustainability.